Mountain Man noticed his fat settler cook hiding Bruises. What he did next shocked the whole town. The cookhouse at Clay Harding's ranch stood at the heart of the sprawling operation, serving meals to the dozens of cowboys, drifters, and seasonal workers who kept the massive cattle enterprise running. It was there, in the pre-dawn darkness of a Montana morning in 1884, that 21-year-old Bessie Shaw moved like a ghost through her daily routine. At nearly 400 pounds, Bessie had learned to navigate the world quietly, trying to make herself invisible despite her substantial frame. She arrived at the cookhouse before sunrise every morning, her movements careful and deliberate as she began preparing breakfast for 40 hungry men. Her round face was usually downcast, her brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, her worn dress covering arms and shoulders that no one was meant to see. But Clay Six-Pack Harding saw everything that happened on his ranch. Standing 6'7", with a powerfully muscled build that had earned him his nickname, massive shoulders, arms like oak trees, and the kind of defined chest and abdominal muscles that showed even through his work clothes, Clay was an imposing presence who commanded respect throughout the territory. At 35, he'd built his ranch from nothing through sheer determination and an almost supernatural ability to read people and situations, which was why he noticed things about Bessie that others missed. The way she flinched when anyone moved too quickly, the careful way she positioned herself so her left side was always against the wall, the long sleeves she wore even in the summer heat, the way her husband Reese Shaw would storm into the cookhouse some mornings, his face dark with anger, and Bessie would go absolutely still until he left. Clay had been watching this pattern for months, his concern growing with each incident. Reese Shaw was a gambler and a drifter who'd married Bessie back east before bringing her to Montana territory, supposedly seeking opportunities, but mostly seeking saloons where he could lose money they didn't have. He was a thin, bitter man with a mean streak that he usually kept hidden from other men, but apparently felt free to express at home. On this particular morning, Clay was checking the breakfast preparations when he noticed Bessie struggling to lift a heavy pot with her right arm while keeping her left arm pressed tight against her body. When she reached up to grab something from a high shelf, her sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal a dark purple bruise encircling her wrist, the unmistakable mark of someone grabbing her too hard, twisting her arm, hurting her deliberately. Clay felt rage surge through him, carefully controlled but burning hot. He'd suspected Reese was abusing Bessie for months, but seeing actual evidence made him want to find the man and settle the matter with his fists. Instead, he approached Bessie with the same careful gentleness he'd use with a spooked horse. "Bessie," he said quietly, making sure not to startle her, "that pot looks heavy. Let me help." "I can manage it, Mr. Hardin," Bessie said quickly, though her left arm was clearly paining her. "I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble." Clay moved to help lift the pot, and when his fingers accidentally brushed her wrist, she couldn't hide her sharp intake of breath. The bruise was fresh, probably from the night before. Clay's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice gentle. "Bessie, if you ever need help, any kind of help, you know you can come to me, right? Day or night, whatever the problem is." Bessie's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded quickly and turned away. "Thank you, Mr. Harding, but I'm fine. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine, and they both knew it. That evening, Clay made a point of staying late in the ranch office, which gave him a clear view of the small cabin where Reese and Bessie lived. Around 9 o'clock, he heard shouting. Reese's voice, slurred with drink, raised in fury. Then came the sound every person dreads hearing, a woman's cry of pain, followed by the crash of something breaking. Clay was on his feet and moving before he'd consciously decided to act. But by the time he reached the cabin, the shouting had stopped. Through the window, he could see Reese passed out in a chair, an empty whiskey bottle on the floor beside him. Bessie was nowhere visible. The next morning, Bessie didn't appear for breakfast preparation. Clay waited until 6 o'clock, an hour past her usual arrival time, before going to check on her. He found her in the cabin, sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching her left arm against her body. Her face was pale with pain, and when she looked up at him, he could see she'd been crying. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said immediately. "I'll get breakfast started right away. The men must be hungry and Bessie." Clay's voice was gentle but firm. "Show me your arm." "It's nothing. I fell. Clumsy of me." "Show me your arm," Clay repeated. With trembling hands, Bessie rolled up her sleeve. Clay felt his breath catch. Her forearm was badly burned, a long, angry red mark that was clearly from contact with something hot. The shape and size told him exactly what had happened. Reese had shoved her against the cook stove hard enough to burn her through her dress. "Jesus Christ," Clay breathed. "Bessie, this needs medical attention. Dr. Morrison needs to—" "No," Bessie said quickly. "Please, no doctor. People will ask questions, and Reese, he gets angry when people interfere. He says what happens between a husband and wife is nobody else's business. Please, Mr. Harding, I'll be fine. I just need to wrap it and get back to work." Clay looked at this brave, broken woman, someone who'd been systematically abused until she believed she deserved it, until she was more afraid of getting help than of enduring continued violence. His decision was made. "Stay here," he said quietly. "I'm going to get some medical supplies from the bunkhouse, and then we're going to have a conversation about what happens next." Clay returned with clean bandages, salve for burns, and a bottle of whiskey for cleaning the wound. With surprising gentleness for hands so large and calloused, he cleaned and dressed Bessie's burn, his touch professional and respectful. "This is going to hurt for a while," he said as he wrapped the bandage. "Burns like this take time to heal. You need to keep it clean and dry." "Thank you," Bessie whispered. "But, Mr. Harding, you can't. Reese will be angry if he thinks I complained to you. He'll say I was trying to cause trouble, trying to make him look bad. He might—" "Please don't say anything to him, please." Clay finished tying off the bandage and sat back on his heels, looking directly into Bessie's frightened eyes. "Bessie, I need you to understand something. What Reese is doing to you, this isn't normal. This isn't what marriage is supposed to be like. A man doesn't hurt his wife. A man protects his wife, cares for her, treats her with respect. What Reese is doing is wrong, and it's not your fault." "But I make him angry," Bessie said, tears streaming down her round cheeks. "I'm too slow sometimes, or I burn the food, or I say the wrong thing, and I'm not pretty like other women. I'm fat and ugly, and he has to live with that, and sometimes he just gets frustrated." "Stop," Clay said firmly. "Stop right there. You are not fat and ugly. You are not the cause of his anger. And nothing you could do would justify him burning you with a stove or putting bruises on your arms. The problem is not you, Bessie. The problem is him." That night, Clay didn't go to his own house. He slept in the bunkhouse, close enough to hear if there was trouble at Reese and Bessie's cabin. Around midnight, he heard it. Reese's voice raised in drunken fury, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the cabin wall. Clay was moving before the echoes faded. He reached the cabin in time to hear Reese screaming at Bessie about the bandage on her arm. "Who told you to wrap that up? Who've you been talking to, you fat cow? I'll teach you to go running to other people with your complaints." Through the window, Clay could see Reese advancing on Bessie, his fist raised. Bessie was backed against the wall, her hands up protectively, but Clay could see something different in her posture, something that hadn't been there before. "I'm not yours to break," Bessie said, her voice quiet but steady. It was the first time Clay had ever heard her stand up to her husband. Reese's response was immediate and violent. He backhanded Bessie across the face, sending her crashing into the table, but before he could follow up, Clay had kicked in the door. "Shaw!" Reese spun around, his face flushed with drink and rage. When he saw Clay filling the doorway, all 6'7" and 250 pounds of barely controlled fury, some of the arrogance left his expression. "This is none of your business, Harding," Reese said, but his voice shook slightly. "What happens between me and my wife is private." "Not when it happens on my land," Clay said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not when my cook shows up to work with burns and bruises. Not when I have to listen to you beating her through the walls." Clay stepped into the cabin, and his presence seemed to fill the entire space. "Here's what's going to happen, Shaw. You're going to pack your things and leave my ranch tonight. You're not going to touch Bessie again. You're not going to threaten her, intimidate her, or come anywhere near her. And if I ever hear that you've laid a hand on her again, I will come looking for you, and when I find you, you won't enjoy the conversation." "She's my wife," Reese protested, though he was backing away from Clay's advancing form. "I have legal rights. You can't just—" Clay's fist connected with Reese's jaw with the sound of an axe hitting wood. Reese dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. "Actually, I can," Clay said to the unconscious man, "and I just did." The next morning, the entire town of Copper Falls gathered to witness something unprecedented. Clay Harding, the most respected rancher in the territory, was marching down Main Street with an unconscious Reese Shaw slung over his shoulder like a sack of grain. Behind him walked Bessie, her chin held high for the first time in years, her bandaged arm visible to everyone. Clay deposited Reese on the steps of the sheriff's office with enough force to wake him up, then stood over him while half the town watched. "This man has been beating his wife," Clay announced to the crowd, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Burning her with stoves, putting bruises on her arms, terrorizing her in her own home. I'm filing charges for assault, and I'm serving notice that Reese Shaw is no longer welcome in this territory. If he's smart, he'll be on the next stage heading east." Sheriff Morrison, who had emerged from his office at the commotion, looked between Clay, the battered Reese, and Bessie's visible injuries. "You want to press charges, Mrs. Shaw?" Bessie looked at her husband, this man who had tormented her for 2 years, who had convinced her she was worthless, who had made her believe she deserved his abuse. Then she looked at Clay, standing steady and protective beside her, and found courage she didn't know she possessed. "Yes," she said clearly, "I want to press charges." The crowd murmured with shock and approval. In 1884 Montana Territory Women rarely stood up to abusive husbands publicly, but Bessie Shaw, supported by Clay Harding's unwavering presence, was doing exactly that. Reese was sentenced to 30 days in jail and permanent banishment from the territory. His gambling debts, which had been mounting for months, were called in by creditors who no longer feared his retaliation. By the time he was released from jail, there was nothing left for him in Montana. He took the eastbound stage and was never seen again. Clay offered Bessie a permanent position as head cook at his ranch, with her own cabin and wages that made her financially independent. More than that, he offered her something she'd never had before: respect, protection, and the knowledge that she was valued not despite her size, but regardless of it. "I don't understand why you helped me," Bessie said one evening as they sat on her new cabin's porch. "Why you risked trouble with Reese, why you cared what happened to me. Most people don't even see me." "I see you," Clay said simply. "I see someone who gets up before dawn to feed 40 men, who works through pain and fear, who finds the strength to stand up to someone twice her size when she finally decides enough is enough. I see courage, Bessie. I see worth. I see someone who deserves better than what she's been given." "I'm still fat," Bessie said quietly. "Still not pretty? Still not what most men want?" "Most men are fools," Clay said bluntly. "Size doesn't determine worth. Beauty fades, but courage, kindness, determination, those last forever. You've got all three, Bessie. That makes you more valuable than all the pretty thin women in the territory combined." Over the following months, as Bessie healed physically and emotionally, she and Clay developed a friendship that gradually deepened into something more. Clay never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel obligated to return his feelings. He simply offered consistent kindness, respect, and protection while she rediscovered who she was when she wasn't afraid. The day Bessie finally told Clay she loved him, 8 months after he'd carried her unconscious husband to the sheriff, the entire town celebrated. Their wedding became the social event of the year, not because of its grandeur, but because of what it represented. A woman who had found her courage, a man who had seen past society's shallow judgments, and a love story that proved worth was always determined by character rather than appearance. Years later, people would still tell the story of the day Clay Harding shocked Copper Falls by publicly exposing Reese Shaw's abuse and defending his fat cook's right to safety and dignity. It became a legend that changed how the community thought about domestic violence, about standing up for the vulnerable, and about the responsibility of good people to act when they witnessed cruelty. But for Bessie, now Bessie Harding, the most important part of the story wasn't the dramatic public confrontation or the town's reaction. It was the quiet moment in her cabin when Clay had gently bandaged her burned arm and told her with absolute conviction that she deserved better. That was the moment her real life began, the moment she learned that she was worth protecting, worth defending, worth loving exactly as she was. And that knowledge, given to her by a mountain man who noticed her hiding bruises and refused to look away, changed not just her life, but her understanding of her own value in ways that would last forever.